My name is Julie Curtis and I teach Russian at the University of Oxford. My colleague Simon and I are going to try and answer some of the questions we're often asked about applying to Oxford to read modern languages.
Hi, I'm Simon Kemp. I'm part of the Modern Languages team. I teach French at the University of Oxford, and these are some of our frequently asked questions. So my first question for Julie, what is the standard A-level or equivalent offer for Oxford Modern Languages courses?
The standard offer for all our modern languages courses is 3 A's at A-level, or else if you're doing advanced hires, it would be AA or AAB, or if you're taking the IB, it would be a score of 38. There's a slight exception for courses where you combine a modern language with studying either classics or philosophy, where you would need 39, and you would need 666 at higher level. But please do consult our website to check what qualifications are needed for all the variety of different courses that you might have been doing in the sixth form before you apply. So my first question to Simon is, should I try to take 4 subjects at A-level, and do you take EPQs into account?
So I can't tell you that you should or shouldn't take 4 subjects at A-level. I can just say that whatever you do in terms of A-levels, the conditional offer that you'll get from Oxford will be for 3 A's at A-level. So you need to just decide whether taking 4 A-levels would make you more or less likely to get those 3 A's, and take a decision on those grounds. I should also say that if you're taking 4 A-levels, when we make the 3A offer, we may specify which of those A-levels we'd like you to get the A's in, which would obviously be the A-levels most relevant to the course you've applied for. On EPQs, they don't play a part in our decision-making in admissions at all, and that's simply because not everybody has the opportunity to do an EPQ at school, so we can't use them as a selection criteria. They do employ quite a lot of the skills that you'll be using on a university course, though: independent research, long-form writing, putting together an argument, that kind of thing. So if you do an EPQ, you'll find that the skills you've learned will come in very handy at the start of your university course. My next question to Julie is, can I take a gap year before starting my course?
Well, there are lots of really good reasons why you might want to take a gap year. It might be that you've had quite a lot of time doing intensive schoolwork and you feel like you want to have a break before you embark on university study. There may be some traveling that you want to do. And we certainly want to hear from you if you would like to consider taking a gap year. What you need to do is to let us know what your plans are, and clearly some of that time is going to be devoted to earning some money to enable you to pursue the plans that you have in mind. What we definitely want to know from you is that for part of the time you will be improving your language skills. It's very important that you shouldn't forget everything that you've learned at school. So it would be obviously a good idea to travel to countries where the languages that you want to study are spoken, and to make sure that you keep practicing speaking and listening and reading the language that you want to study. So by all means apply to us for a gap year before you start. Realistically, what that means is that we would want to offer you a place alongside a cohort of people who we haven't yet met for the following year. And so it's probably going to be the case that we would be happy to offer a gap year place to our strongest applicants. But that shouldn't be any reason to deter you from applying for a gap year, because you apply normally during your upper 6th year. If by any chance we aren't able to offer you a place that year, there's nothing to stop you reapplying during the gap year. And indeed, you might use the time between finishing your A-levels and applying again to spend some time in the country and actually improve your language skills. We have plenty of people who apply to us a second time during the gap year, and quite often they're successful. There's no prejudice against them. So by all means, give it a go and have a really adventurous year. So my next question to Simon is, what do you look for in a personal statement?
We look at personal statements very carefully from all our applicants, and we're looking particularly for things that meet our selection criteria. And you can find the selection criteria published on the web pages for each of the courses that Oxford offers. For modern languages, our selection criteria are basically, we're looking for people who've got an aptitude and an interest in language learning. If you're applying for a language with a sixth form qualification, then we'll look for skills achieved and competence. Otherwise, we'll look for just a general interest in languages. We're looking for communication skills, and we're also looking for an aptitude and an interest for the kind of cultural literary studies that also form part of our course. So you could show those in a personal statement by, for instance, talking about encounters you've had with the culture of the country or countries whose language you want to study, films you might have seen, books you might have read in translation, things you might have tried to read in the target language, or just more generally an interest in culture and literature that you've demonstrated through reading English literature, for instance. We're aware that you only get to write one personal statement, and therefore you can't tailor it specifically for the course in Oxford, but we would like to see among the things that you say, things that match our selection criteria. My next question for Julie, what are your language tests like?
Right, well, we ask every applicant to do at least one language test, sometimes two, for the languages that they are applying to study at Oxford. You need to register to take the language tests at the same time as you fill in your UCAS form and submit it. And you need to talk to your school or your local centre about making sure that you're signed up to take the test, which will take place probably in early November. The tests for any language that you've already studied to A-level or equivalent are essentially grammar tests. So they're a 30-minute test, and we want to see from you that you have mastered the essential concepts and learnt the typical patterns for the language that you've been studying. We don't expect you to get it all right, but we'd like to see that you've taken good advantage of the education that you've received so far, and that you have some experience of forming correct or mostly correct sentences. If you're applying to study a language from scratch, we have something called the Language Aptitude Test, which is another 30-minute test. Every year, our colleagues in Oxford, rather wonderfully, devise a new language, especially for you. And what the test consists of is, say the language is called gobbledygook in a given year. You're given 3 sentences of gobbledygook and their translation into English, 2 sentences of English and their translation into gobbledygook, and your task will then be to create 2 new sentences in gobbledygook or translate a bit of gobbledygook into English. And then that process is repeated with further complications, perhaps allowing gobbledygook to use plurals as well as singular, or turn past tenses into present tenses and so on. They're usually quite fun to complete. All our tests are available as sample tests online, so give it a go to see what it feels like to complete the task in the time, and we will then mark that once you've done the test. My next question, Simon, is what schoolwork should I send in?
So the first thing I should say is that the number and type of schoolwork varies between our different courses. So on our admissions pages, it will say very clearly precisely what schoolwork we'd like to see for the course combination that you're applying for. So do look at that. But I can say more generally that what we normally ask for is one piece of discursive writing, essay style writing, written in English, which is to be a normal piece of schoolwork that you've handed in as part of your normal school day, and that your teacher has marked and handed back to you. So if you're doing a subject which involves writing essays or essay-like pieces, such as history or geography, something from that would be fine. If you're not doing anything like that, then perhaps asking a teacher to look at a small piece of writing that you've written specially would be a way around that. If you're studying a language in sixth form that you're applying for, we'll also ask for a piece written in the target language, which again should be a normal piece of language work that you've handed in the course of your schoolwork and had marked by a teacher. Obviously, if you're applying for a beginner's language, then we won't ask for any samples. My next question, which is maybe the most common question we get at FAQ events. Julie, what happens in an interview?
Well, there are lots of stories and rumours and scary legends about what takes place in Oxford interviews. The truth of the matter is that interviews are all different because they're conducted by individuals. They're conducted by people like Simon and me. There will always be two people in the room in the interview when you arrive. They'll last between 20 minutes and half an hour, something like that. And our main principle is to try and get the best out of you. A good way of thinking about it is that what we would like to do is to find out what you can do, not what you can't do. We're not setting out to trip you up or embarrass you or make things difficult. We want to see you perform really well. We know that every single person who comes into the room is really, really nervous. This may be the first interview you've ever had. And so the first thing that will happen is that we will try to put you at your ease. We'll give you plenty of time and space in which to get used to the situation. And we'll start to chat to you about yourself, and particularly we'll be interested to find out about what's motivated you to choose the course that you've selected. So we'll want to know what you think you're going to enjoy about spending 4 years at Oxford studying one or more languages with us. And then at some point we will switch over to discussing some text or passage that we've given you, something that you haven't seen before. You may have had time to prepare it a bit before the interview begins. And we're going to ask you some questions about it. And that part of the interview really, to some extent, replicates a typical tutorial in Oxford. It's a dialogue. So we will ask you some questions, invite you to suggest an interpretation or give an opinion. If we are not sure that we agree with you, we'll perhaps ask you a different question or maybe challenge that interpretation, but it's not about getting things wrong. We just want to see how you respond to suggestions and to teaching in that way. And at a later part in the interview, probably we would spend a few minutes, 2 or 3, maximum 5 minutes, practicing speaking with you in the foreign language. If you don't feel particularly confident about speaking the language, that's not the end of the world. We will simply note the fact that when you come to Oxford, you'll need to brush up that part of your skills. It will be challenging, and interviews are always challenging, but mostly people who have come into the interview very nervous come out of it saying, well, actually it was rather enjoyable and interesting. And we hope that, in fact, you would find that that's a really rewarding part of the application process. My next question to you, Simon, is how should I choose a college?
Right, so colleges, they're a very nice way in such a massive university like Oxford to create a manageably sized community. So a college is small enough that you can recognize everyone's face, know most people's names, and it's the place where you'll live, where you'll eat, where you'll do quite a lot of your socializing. I should say it's not necessarily the place where you'll have all of your teaching. That quite often during the first year course, which is a standalone course that doesn't count towards your final degree grade, a lot of that introductory teaching will happen by the tutor based in your college, although not always. But from the second year onwards, when things do start to count towards your degree, you'll be taught more at a university level. So if you want to study a particular subject, say German film, if the German film expert is based in your college, then you'll have the teaching in your college. If the German film expert is based in another college across town, then you'll head off to a different college and get taught there. So that means you don't need to choose a college based on the specialisms or the interests of the teaching staff who are based there. And that means you can use other things to base your decision on. Whether you like the architecture, for instance, if you manage to go and visit, which is a very good idea, and wander around, if you meet some people there, if you feel you like the atmosphere and like the people, those kind of things are a good way to choose a college for yourself. 2 things I should add. It's very often that people choose a college and then end up being given an offer for a place at a different college. That happens very frequently, and people pretty much always end up happy at the college they get placed in. Plus, you don't have to choose a college at all. You're very welcome to make an open application where you apply for a subject at the university and you don't specify which college you like to go to, and then you will be assigned a college. And again, that always works out very well. My next question for Julie. If I study 2 languages, are they both studied up to the same level? And what if I take one of those languages from scratch?
Well, the answer to that question is that yes, both languages in Oxford are studied up to the same level, certainly if you've already studied them at school, but also if you start one of them from scratch, which is quite a considerable number of our students choosing to follow up that option, that opportunity to start a language that wasn't perhaps available to them at school. I should perhaps mention that you can study all the languages we offer from scratch, except French and Spanish for the moment. And this is something which is a bit unlike most other universities, where there's a sort of major minor pattern. In Oxford, if you take 2 languages, they will essentially be 50-50 all the way through to the very end of your final year. You'll do the same number of language tasks in your final examinations at the end of the 4th year, and you will have something like 50-50 options for the literature and culture and linguistics options on both sides. What that means is that if you are starting a language from scratch, you start off by working very intensively on the language in order to catch up those skills, and people make very rapid progress. If I can give an example of that, a few years ago in Russian, my subject, we had 10 students who achieved a first-class degree at the end of their course, and 5 of those had started Russian from scratch, so they had reached exactly the same level as their counterparts. So whether you take a language from scratch or whether you've already studied it at school before you arrive, you'll end up being really fluent and confident about using it in all the situations where you might want to in traveling or in work in the future. The next question that I have to ask Simon is about what we call joint schools in Oxford. And that's a course where you combine one of our European languages with a subject from a different faculty. And we have 6 different options that you can pursue under the joint school, in the joint school framework. That would be to combine your European language either with classics or with English or with history or with philosophy or with linguistics or with a modern Middle Eastern language, which has to be either Hebrew, Turkish, Persian or Arabic. And the question that we're often asked about these joint schools is, how does that affect my study on the European language side? Do I do less work or more work than other people?
The answer is you do the same. So it works just the same as with a 2-language student. So say if you're doing German and Russian, you'll do more or less 50% German, 50% Russian. It's just the same with the joint school. If you're doing German and history, you'll do 50% German, 50% history. So it's exactly the same ratio. Among those options that you're taking on the 2 sides of your course, some of them can connect both sides of the course up. You could, for instance, do a dissertation that connects up the history side with the language side. You could decide to focus your course in ways that create other bridges between. Say, for example, if you're doing philosophy and modern languages, you could study Enlightenment philosophy on the philosophy side and the thought and culture of the same period on the other side, but you're not required to do that. And so if you'd like to take different paths on the different sides of your course and spread yourself out a little bit, then you're very welcome to do that as well. My last question for Julie is about the year abroad. I'd like to ask, how do I plan my year abroad? And when I'm on it, how do I keep up my studies on the other subject?
Right, well, the year abroad is actually a bit of a misnomer because it's actually 15 months between the time when you finish your studies in 1 year at Oxford in June, and then you come back to pick up your studies again in October of the following year. Normally, you take your year abroad in the 3rd year. There are 2 exceptions to that. One of them is if you do Russian from scratch, and the other is if you do one of the Middle Eastern languages in combination with a European language. And for the Russian for Beginners course and for the Middle Eastern languages, there are compulsory courses that you have to take during the 2nd year instead of the 3rd year. And that's in order to consolidate your language learning of these relatively difficult languages. So you've got plenty of time in which to plan a whole variety of activities. We don't, apart from the examples that I've mentioned, impose a scheme on you. You choose whether you want to study at a foreign university, whether you want to get an internship or work experience with some company or other, or whether you'd like to take up opportunities, say, for teaching English, such as those provided by the British Council, for students who can go and do that job either in a European country or in a country, say, in Africa or South America, where the relevant languages are spoken. You choose what you most want to do, what is going to be most beneficial for your studies. You will need to think about both languages or both subjects that you're studying, and you may divide the year up perhaps around something corresponding to an academic year, say if you're teaching or studying, which would run from September until perhaps June, but then use the 2 summer vacations on either side to spend time, say, in the other country, perhaps go to Germany or Austria in order to get some work experience. Or you might divide the year half and half, spend most of 1 year in one place, and then around Christmas time change your location and move to a different place. Our students have incredibly exciting times. They can divide their time between Moscow and Rio de Janeiro, or Berlin and Madrid, or West Africa and some lovely place in Italy. All sorts of different possibilities. As far as the planning is concerned, there's a huge amount of information available. We have meetings that we organize in the faculty, a lot of advice, a lot of information about how to fund it, how to organize it safely. And there's also a huge database that is filled in every year by returning students. And so you can inherit from the previous generation of students a good job, some good tips, some warnings about something that was really expensive or didn't quite work out. And we will guide you and steer you. The one overall thing that we insist upon is that you should immerse yourself in the foreign language, in the culture of the country that you're studying. We wouldn't be happy about you taking a work experience in an English-speaking environment where you wouldn't get much chance to practice your language. As far as the other subjects is concerned, well, obviously, if you're studying 2 languages, you simply divide your time up between the relevant countries. If you're studying, say, history or philosophy, your tutors are used to the fact that you will be going away for a year during your course, and they will simply advise you what sort of work you should be doing to prepare for your studies in your final year for when you return. But it's usually a great adventure. And my final question to you, Simon, is, so what careers do modern languages graduates from Oxford go on to do once they've completed their course here?
So I've seen my students head off into all kinds of different things, as well as the very specifically language-related things like translation, interpreting, and teaching. They've also picked up a wide variety of skills which enable them to take on all kinds of jobs with an international dimension. So, for example, they've picked up on communication skills, empathy and people skills, research, argument, and analysis. All these kind of soft skills that can be used in a wide variety of areas. So I've sent people into business, into finance, into law, which can then of course become international business, international finance, international law. People have gone into government, sometimes into the diplomatic service or the foreign service, or into non-governmental organizations and charities. People have gone into journalism and the creative industries. A wide variety of options that are open to you by a modern languages degree. It's very common to top up a modern languages degree with a master's, say, in business administration or in law, to enable you to take your language into a further area. And I should note that you can do that way around. You can take a 1-year law conversion course after a modern languages degree. You can't do it in the other direction because languages take time to percolate through and to develop your skills. So you can't do a law degree and then learn a language in a year. Language skills are very in demand from employers, and our employment rates for our graduates are very strong. So really, with a language degree, the world is your oyster. And that comes to the end of our frequently asked questions. I hope you found that interesting and useful. And please do look at the Modern Languages admissions pages for further information about how our courses work and how you can apply for them. Thank you for listening.